The plate was still warm in Thomas's hands when Margaret's voice cut across the noise of the gala floor. "Give me that." It was not a question. Margaret Hale did not ask questions when she could issue instructions. She crossed the service corridor in 3 brisk steps, her catering jacket buttoned to the collar, her expression the kind that belonged on a woman who had just caught someone shoplifting. She took the plate from Thomas's hands without touching her fingers and set it down on the folding cart as if it were evidence. "You gave a guest your own portion," she said, low enough that the nearest servers could still hear every word. "You handed a man in a flannel shirt one of our premium plates because you felt sorry for him. That is $60 of braised short rib, and I do not have a spare." Thomas said nothing. She had learned over the years that nothing was usually the correct answer when Margaret was in this posture. "You are on dishwashing for the rest of the night," Margaret said. She was already turning away. "Send Renata up to cover your position." Thomas nodded once and walked toward the kitchen. She was 34 years old. She had been working catering events for 7 years, 4 of them under Margaret, and she was good at the job. Her hands were steady. She did not spill. She could carry 4 plates without a tray, and never once had she dropped one. She was paid $14 an hour for this precision, and she had never asked for more because she had never been in a position where asking felt safe. The gala was a corporate event at the Langford Hotel held in the hotel's second-floor ballroom, which could seat 200 with room to spare. Tonight, it was seated at 180, and the remaining 20 chairs had been pulled aside to create a looser arrangement near the bar where guests could circulate. The client was a hospitality company called Voss Group, and Margaret had landed the catering contract 6 weeks earlier at a value, she had mentioned more than once, of $60,000. She mentioned it again that morning during the van ride over, to no one in particular, the way people mention a number they find more meaningful than anything else about the event. Thomas had helped load the van, helped set the tables, helped adjust the centerpieces twice when Margaret decided the height was wrong, and had just settled into her position at the buffet station when the line opened. She had not planned to give anyone her plate. The man was standing near the end of the buffet line when Thomas first noticed him. He was dressed plainly, a flannel shirt open at the collar, dark trousers without any obvious crease, shoes that were clean but not polished. Among the guests in their conference blazers and occasion dresses, he looked like someone who had taken a wrong turn from the service entrance. Thomas noticed him not because he stood out in any alarming way, but because of what he was doing when he reached the serving station. A woman ahead of him in line, older, moving slowly with a slight hesitation in her left step, was having trouble managing her plate and the tongs at the same time. She would pick up the tongs, lose her grip on the plate, set it down, begin again. The line had stalled. Thomas was about to step forward when the man behind the woman set down his own plate, took the tongs from the station, and served the woman her portion himself. He did it without a word and without any gesture that invited notice. He simply did it, then stepped back and waited while she moved on. He reached the short rib station after that and found it empty. The last portion had gone to the woman ahead of him. Thomas had been watching. Her own plate, the one she'd plated up for herself to eat on break, was sitting on the small shelf behind the station. She looked at it. She looked at him. He was not complaining. He was not flagging anyone down. He was just standing there, reading the card on the empty pan with the mild interest of a person who reads things. She picked up her plate and walked it around the station and set it in front of him. "Ours ran short," she said. "This one's full, though." He looked at the plate and then at her. His eyes were a very calm grey. She noticed that afterward, the calm. "That's yours," he said. "It is," she agreed. "I'll eat later." He held her gaze for one moment, something measured in it, and then he accepted the plate with a quiet, "Thank you," that sounded like it meant exactly what it said. 2 minutes later, Margaret appeared. Patrice found Thomas at the dishwashing station 20 minutes into the demotion, loaded a rack of glasses onto the counter with more force than was strictly necessary, and said, "She reassigned you." "She told you." "She told Renata. Renata told me, and I told myself I was going to come back here and not say what I want to say." Patrice set another rack down. She was 41, 9 years Thomas's senior, and she had worked more catering events than Thomas had, though she claimed to remember fewer of them. "What I will say is, you gave the man your own food." "He'd been standing there for a minute already." "I know. He didn't ask for anything." "I know that too." Patrice leaned against the counter, not working, just present. "Margaret doesn't care about that. Margaret cares that the plates are counted and the client is happy, and the 60,000 covers her costs and her vacation in April." Thomas began rinsing. The water was hot and the steam rose in a soft column towards the kitchen vents. "He helped an older woman with her tongs," Thomas said. "That's why he was at the back of the line." "I figured it was something like that." "Nobody saw him do it." Patrice was quiet for a moment. "You saw him." "I was the one watching the station." "Right." Patrice straightened, picked up a cloth, began actually working. "Well, Margaret saw you and not him, and that's how it goes." Thomas ran another rack through the washer. The ballroom noise filtered in through the swing door in waves. The polite percussion of silverware, the low tide of conversation, the occasional swell of laughter from the bar end. She could hear it all and be present in none of it. If you like what you're hearing, subscribing helps this channel bring you more stories like this one. The service corridor connected the kitchen to 3 different parts of the hotel's event level. It ran behind the ballroom, past the linen closet, and out near the loading dock. And it was quiet in the way that back-of-house spaces are always quiet. Not peaceful, just empty of the things that made the front rooms loud. Thomas was carrying a tray of clean glasses toward the ballroom door when she nearly walked into the plainly dressed man who was standing just inside the corridor's far entrance, one hand on the wall, looking at something on his phone. He looked up. She steadied the tray. "Sorry," he said. He stepped to the side immediately, clearing space. "I'm fine." She repositioned the tray. "You're not supposed to be back here." "I know." He didn't move toward the door. "I needed quiet for a minute." Thomas considered him. He was taller up close than he'd seemed across the buffet line, and he stood with a very particular stillness, the kind that didn't belong to someone unsure of himself. He held his phone loosely, not clutching it. "There's a coat room at the end of the hall," she said. "Past the linen closet. It's empty tonight." "Thank you." She moved to pass him. He stepped aside again, courteously, and as she did, she said without planning to, "Did you get enough to eat?" He almost smiled. "Not quite." "I did. It was very good." "It should have been. We were short-staffed at that station, and she still put out every portion." "She being the woman who reassigned you." Thomas stopped. She turned just enough to look at him directly. He met her eyes without any particular expression. Nothing sharp in it, just attention. "You saw that," she said. "I was standing fairly close." She thought about what to say. She chose nothing, which was her habit. She adjusted the tray and walked through the swing door into the ballroom. Later, she would think about that exchange and try to locate what had unsettled her. It was not that he had witnessed something unflattering. It was that he had named it so plainly, without apology or emphasis, the way you name a chair or a window. The gala ran until 10 o'clock, and the breakdown began at 15:15. Margaret moved through the tables with her clipboard, checking inventory against a printed list, speaking to servers in clipped phrases that sounded like line items. Thomas was back on floor duty by 8, once the dishwashing load reduced, because Renata had gone home early with a headache and the floor needed coverage. She did not know whether Margaret had authorized the return or simply failed to prevent it. She took up her station without asking. At 8:30, she was straightening a table near the perimeter of the room, the one farthest from the main arrangement, which guests had partially dismantled to move chairs closer to the bar. She was resetting the cloth, repositioning the centerpiece, the small cylindrical vase of white flowers that had been knocked to one side, when she heard a step behind her, and the man was there again. He set down his drink on the adjacent table. He looked at what she was doing. "The flowers were like that for an hour," he said. "I noticed. I kept waiting for someone to fix them." She settled the vase and adjusted 2 of the stems, the shorter ones that had slipped below the rim. "Does it bother you, a crooked vase?" "It bothers me when I can see something's wrong and can't tell whether it's been noticed." He paused. "That's a different thing from the vase." Thomas looked at him briefly. He was watching the vase, not her. Or he was watching both in the particular way of someone who does not require a distinction between them. "It's been noticed," she said. She smoothed the cloth and stepped back. The table was right again. He picked up his drink. "Thank you," he said for the second time that evening. And each time it had the same quality. Not social grace, not rote politeness, but the specific acknowledgement of a specific thing. She carried her cloth towards the next table and did not look back. But she thought about the phrase. "Can't tell whether it's been noticed." It was an odd thing to say about a centerpiece, and she knew, with the particular instinct of someone who listens carefully, that he had not entirely been talking about the centerpiece. There was a break at 9, 15 minutes. Company policy for shifts over 5 hours. The staff gathered near the loading dock entrance, which was propped open with a milk crate, and Patrice produced a sleeve of crackers from somewhere and split them without ceremony. Thomas leaned against the cool concrete wall and let the outside air, October and sharp, move across her wrists. She told Patrice about the corridor conversation and the table conversation. Patrice ate a cracker and said, "Plain shirt, grey eyes, no name tag." He's a guest. Guests don't stand in the service corridor needing quiet unless they're avoiding someone, or they're used to back of house and don't think about it. He was on his phone. Or that. Patrice looked at the propped door, at the slice of parking structure visible beyond it. He's the one who helped the woman with her tongs? Yes. And you gave him your food and Margaret dressed you down in front of everyone and he stood close enough to hear it? He did. Patrice ate another cracker. He said thank you. Both times. Both times, Patrice repeated, with an inflection Thomas recognized as meaning that Patrice was paying attention to something Thomas was not yet paying attention to. "He's a guest," Thomas said again. Patrice capped the crackers and put them back wherever she'd gotten them from. Thomas went back inside. The thing about working a room for 6 hours is that you develop an unconscious knowledge of where everyone is in it. You stop thinking of it as a conscious effort, and your body does the spatial tracking without consulting your mind. Thomas knew, without deciding to know, where the plain-shirted man was at most moments of the evening. Near the bar at 7:30, speaking with a woman in a red blazer. Back near the perimeter tables at 8:15. In the corridor at 8:32, which she knew because that was when she'd been there. She told herself this awareness was professional habit, and it was, partly. At 9:45, near the end of the service, Thomas went back to the kitchen. The chafing dishes had been cleared, but one of the food stations still had a pan of sides, roasted carrots and something grain-based, and a wrapped plate of the short rib that had been kept back for late arrivals who never came. She stood looking at it for a moment. She thought about the man who had served a slow woman's plate for her and said nothing, and then stood at the empty station without complaint. She took a clean plate from the rack. She arranged it deliberately, the carrots placed in a proper portion, the grain alongside, the short rib centered and not piled, the whole thing covered with a clean cloth so it would hold heat. She carried it out to the floor, found him where she expected to find him, near the perimeter, and set it on the table in front of him. "We found a spare plate," she said. He looked at it, and then at her. "From the reserves," she said. "It would have been thrown out." He did not dispute this. He also did not quite believe it. She could see that in the calm grey of his eyes. He believed the plate, not the explanation. "Sit down," he said. It was not an order exactly. It was the quiet suggestion of someone who gives suggestions they expect to be evaluated on their merits. "I'm working." "You've been working since 4 o'clock." She did not ask how he knew that. Shifts don't end early because a guest asks them to. "No," he acknowledged this. "They don't." She stayed standing. He did not press. He looked at the plate and then said, without segue, "I don't know what your plans are after tonight, but if you wanted to talk about that, I would like to." Thomas looked at him. He looked back. The ballroom noise was behind her, the low tide pulling toward 10 o'clock, and the end of things. "You don't know me," she said. "I know what I've seen." She thought about what he'd seen. A woman doing a job she'd been demoted from, doing it to the same standard anyway, making a plate out of a kitchen with no audience. "I have to go back to the floor," she said. He nodded. He did not look disappointed. He looked like a man who had said what he meant and was prepared to wait for whatever came next. The office Margaret used during events was not really an office. It was the hotel's side manager room, small and fluorescent lit, borrowed for the evening, and the door did not fully seat in its frame. Thomas was walking past it at 9:45, carrying a folded tablecloth back to the linen cart, when she heard Margaret's voice through the gap. She was on the phone. Thomas did not stop. She slowed just slightly because the tone of Margaret's voice was the particular tone of someone speaking to someone they considered an ally, low and confiding, without the crispness she used for staff. "No, the evening's been fine," Margaret was saying. "The staff, you know how it is. You get one or two who think they're contributing something more than they are. The kind of help you use once and throw away. She's been pleasant enough, but she won't be on my roster again." Thomas stood in the corridor with the tablecloth folded over her arms. She had been a regular on Margaret's roster for 2 years. Not every event, but enough that she had assumed a kind of baseline standing. She showed up. She was competent. She did not cause problems. She had believed, without consciously articulating it, that this was a kind of currency. She had been wrong about the currency. She stood there for 3 full seconds, maybe 4. The corridor was empty. The swing door was 20 feet away. The ballroom was behind it, full of people, 200 attendees, and the low tide pulling toward the last hour. She walked to the linen cart and set the tablecloth down with the same care she would have given it under any other circumstance. She went back to the floor. Patrice found her at the water station at 9:55, refilling a pitcher, and said nothing, just stood beside her. Thomas did not look up. "She's on the phone with someone," Thomas said. "I know." "She said I won't be on the roster again." Patrice was quiet for a moment. "She's been wanting to move to a younger crew, cheaper. She's been telling me I'm steady." "You are steady." Patrice took the pitcher from her and finished filling it. "She wants steady and steady cheap is 22 years old and grateful. You're 34 and competent, and those are not the same thing to Margaret." Thomas took the pitcher back. "She said the kind of help you use once and throw away." Patrice said, very quietly, "I'm sorry. Don't be." Thomas straightened. The ballroom was through the door, and through the door were tables that still needed clearing, and a man who had eaten a plate she'd made for him out of a pan that would have been thrown away. And none of it, not the demotion or the phone call, or the phrase that was still settling in her chest like something cold. None of it was going to change what her hands did in the next hour. She pushed through the door. The 10 o'clock mark arrived the way the ends of long evenings always did, not as a bell, but as a collective relaxing of posture. Guests moved toward the exits. Staff began the quiet choreography of clearing, stacking, folding. The room released its formality in increments. Thomas was at the far table when the main ballroom doors opened and a man entered who had clearly not been at the event. He was in a dark jacket, efficient and direct, and he moved through the thinning crowd with the bearing of someone on an errand that had a deadline attached to it. He was not young, mid-50s, with the kind of face that looked permanently focused. He saw the man in the flannel shirt standing near the perimeter tables and crossed the room toward him without stopping for anything. He did not look at the guests he passed. He looked only at the man he was walking toward. Thomas was close enough to hear him. She was not trying to be close enough to hear. She had been clearing the last table in that section and had not yet moved away. "Mr. Voss," the man said. He said it the way you say a name when you are not announcing it, just using it, the way you say a name you have said 10,000 times. "I need 10 minutes. The Hargrove situation has developed and I need your call." The man in the flannel shirt, Daniel, looked at the man in the dark jacket. He looked at Thomas. She had not moved. She was holding 2 glasses, one in each hand, and she was looking at him and not looking away, and he was doing the same, and the room was very still in the particular way of rooms in which something has just become different. "Owen," the man said to the man in the dark jacket, "give me a moment." Owen stopped. He looked from Daniel to Thomas and back, reassessing without visibly doing so, the way trained executives reassess. "Of course," Owen said. He stepped aside, not far, but enough. Margaret was near the center of the room. Thomas saw her register Owen's arrival, register the exchange, register the name that had been spoken, and begin processing it. The processing was visible in her face the way a current is visible in water. Not dramatic, just present, moving through. She walked toward the group. She stopped 4 feet away. "Mr. Voss," she said, and her voice had entirely changed register. She was performing now, the crispness replaced by something warmer and more deliberate, the way a room changes temperature when someone opens a window. "I hope the evening has been to your satisfaction." Daniel looked at her with the same calm grey attention he had given everything else that evening. "The food was good," he said. "The service was uneven." Margaret's smile did not disappear, but it altered at the edges. "I hope any concerns," she said, "can be addressed going forward. The catering contract, as you know, has been a priority for us, and I want to assure you that any issues tonight were entirely manageable and have already been." "The short rib ran out at the buffet," he said. "A portioning issue, temporary. A member of your staff gave me her own plate when the station went empty." Margaret went very still. She looked from Daniel to Thomas, and Thomas could see the precise moment when the arithmetic arrived, when she understood that the man who had been wearing a flannel shirt near the buffet and the man whose name Owen had just said in front of the entire remaining floor of the gala were the same man, and that the staff member she had reassigned to dishwashing and described as the kind you use once and throw away was the same woman who had, in front of this particular man, performed the exact kind of service that made a catering company's reputation, or dissolved it. "Thomas," Margaret began. She did not finish the sentence. There was nothing available to finish it with. She had used the words she had, and the words had been on a phone call in a room with an improperly seated door, and they had arrived ahead of her. "I gave her plate to this gentleman because the station was empty and he'd been waiting," Thomas said. She kept her voice level. She was still holding one glass. She set it down on the table behind her. He'd helped another guest at the station, and that's why he was last in line. She said it to the room, not to Margaret. She said it quietly enough that only the near group could hear, but the near group included Owen, and it included Patrice, who had come to stand at the edge of the clearing the way Patrice always arrived when something required a witness. Daniel looked at Thomas with the same expression he had worn since the first time she'd looked at him directly in the corridor, when she'd said the plate was hers and she'd eat later. Something in it had not moved all evening. It was not warmth exactly, or not warmth only. It was recognition. "I've been to a lot of events like this," he said to the room, to no one specifically, or to all of them. "I've eaten at a lot of catering stations. It's very rare that someone gives you something of their own without being asked." Owen was writing something. Thomas noticed this peripherally, the efficient motion of a man who records things that need recording. Margaret said, "I can assure you." And then she said, "The catering arrangement." And then she said something that was not a complete sentence. And she stopped. Her authority over Thomas was denominated in the contract, $60,000 of client relationship that gave her the standing to reassign a server to dishwashing without explanation. The contract ran to the client, and the client was now looking at Thomas and not at Margaret, and the math of it was simple and final. Patrice made a sound that was not quite a word, a small exhale that could have been the controlled cousin of a laugh, and she covered it with the professional interest of someone checking a rack of glasses. "Thomas," Daniel said. He was using her name because he had heard it from Margaret's aborted sentence, and he said it without any particular ceremony, just used it as the specific identifier it was. "What was your plan after the gala tonight?" Thomas looked at him. She considered the question seriously, because he was asking it seriously. Her plan had been the van back to the depot, the walk to her car, the drive home, the quiet of the apartment at midnight, with the specific quality of quiet that belongs to people whose days contain no one who is waiting for them. "Nothing fixed," she said. He said, "Owen is going to need about 10 minutes. After that, if you have time, I would like to talk." Owen, to his credit, neither confirmed nor denied the 10-minute figure with any expression. He simply wrote what he was writing. Margaret said, "I'm sure Thomas has her closing duties too." "She's finished," Patrice said. It was the first thing Patrice had said aloud in 4 minutes. She said it with the toneless conviction of a woman delivering a weather report. "I'll cover the close." Margaret looked at Patrice. Patrice met the look with the pleasant, open patience of someone who does not require anything from the person looking at them. The room began to reassemble itself around the new arrangement of things, the way rooms always do when the actual weight of power in them shifts and the furniture has to catch up. Thomas picked up the glass she had set down and carried it to the clearing station, because her hands required it, because she was not the kind of person who put a glass down and left it there just because the surrounding circumstances had changed. She set it on the tray. She straightened. She pulled the cloth from where she'd tucked it at her waist and folded it once and set it on the shelf above the tray. The cloth was white with a narrow band of blue at one edge, the same cloth she'd used since 4 o'clock, and it was the last thing she put down in the ballroom that belonged to a night that had started as one kind of night and had become, in the span of a single name, spoken by a man in a dark jacket, a different one entirely. Patrice appeared at her shoulder. "He helped a woman with her tongs," Patrice said very quietly, "and you saw him, and Margaret didn't see either of you." "No." "And now, Margaret is standing over there, trying to finish a sentence." Thomas looked. Margaret was speaking to Owen in a low tone that had lost its performing quality. Owen was listening with the specific attentiveness of someone who has been briefed on this situation already and is not surprised by what he is hearing. Patrice, Thomas said. Yes. Thank you for closing. Patrice picked up the tray. Go talk to the man who ate your short rib, she said. I'll manage the glasses. Thomas crossed the room. She did not hurry. The floor was mostly clear now, the guests thinned to a handful, the tables half stripped, the low tide, all the way out. She passed the perimeter table where she had reset the centerpiece and the vase was still straight, the two shorter stems exactly where she'd placed them. She noticed this without breaking stride. Daniel was standing near the ballroom's side entrance, the one that led to the hotel's upper lobby, away from the catering corridor and the loading dock. He had his jacket on now, a dark one that had appeared from somewhere, and the flannel shirt was underneath it, unchanged. He looked like himself, which was, Thomas was beginning to understand, always going to be the relevant fact about him. Owen was finishing a phone call 15 feet away. His back was to them, his voice too low to carry. Thomas came to stand near Daniel, not close enough to be performing proximity, just close enough for a conversation. You go to your own events in a flannel shirt, she said. It's useful, he said, without apology. What's useful about it? He considered this, as if the question deserved actual thought. When people know who you are, they perform for you. When they don't, they just do their job. You find out which is which. Thomas absorbed this. That's a strange way to evaluate a catering company. It's effective, he paused. It's also how you find out who gives their own plate to the man at the back of the line. She looked at him directly. The ballroom behind her was going quieter by the minute, Patrice and two remaining staff working through the last of the close. I didn't do that because you were watching, she said. I know. He said it without any weight on it, no emphasis, no strategic softening, just a plain sentence. That's the part that mattered. Outside the side entrance, through the glass panel of the hotel door, the October night was visible, sharp and dark, the parking structure's concrete columns lit at intervals. Thomas could see her reflection faintly in the panel, herself, her catering jacket still buttoned, her hair beginning to slip from where she'd pinned it at 4 o'clock. Owen ended his call. He turned and said to Daniel, "It can wait until morning." Daniel said, "Good." Owen looked at Thomas with the evaluating attention he'd applied to everything else in the room, and then said to Daniel, "I'll let you know," and crossed toward the main exit with the directional certainty of someone who knows exactly where he is going, and has been there many times before. Thomas and Daniel were standing in a nearly empty ballroom at 10:23 on a Thursday night in October, and through the ballroom's side entrance panel the night was very still. "The conversation I mentioned," Daniel said. "Yes. It doesn't have to be tonight." "No," she said, "it doesn't." She looked at the room. The centerpiece on the far table straight, the cloth on the shelf folded, the glasses on the tray, Patrice's work, all of it done and accounted for. "What were you actually evaluating tonight?" she asked. "Not just the catering." He was quiet for a moment, and the quiet was not evasive, just his. "Whether the contract warranted renewal," he said. "Whether the company's standards held outside the pitch meeting." He paused. "I had my answer by about 7:30. 7:30 was when she had given him her plate. She understood this without needing him to say it. She understood several things simultaneously, in the way that understandings sometimes arrive after an evening of accumulation. That he had been watching since before she noticed him watching, that the corridor and the table and the corridor again were not coincidental, that when a man who owns the hotel and the event and the contract tells you he wants to talk, the wanting is real, and the talk is going to matter. She also understood with the same plain certainty that she had not done any of it for this. Not the plate, not the vase, not the second plate from the kitchen. She had done it because a man was standing empty-handed at a station that had run out, and because a vase was crooked for an hour, and because a pan of short rib was going to be thrown away, and he had eaten what she'd made for him without protest, and said thank you both times. None of that changed because his name was Voss. None of it needed to change. "All right," she said. He looked at her, the same calm attention, the same grey. "All right," he repeated, to the conversation. She reached up and unpinned her hair, which had been slipping since 9 o'clock, and pinned it properly again in 2 efficient motions. "Not tonight, though. Tonight I'm still on the clock until Patrice signs off the close." Something moved in his face, brief and definite. "Of course," he said. She turned back toward the floor. Patrice was at the last table, gathering the centerpiece, the small white vase in both hands. She looked up at Thomas across the room, and her expression said, very clearly without a word, that she had been paying close attention all evening and was prepared to discuss it in detail at a later time. Thomas picked up the nearest folded cloth from the clearing station and walked to the next table that needed it. Her hands were steady. They had been steady all evening, through the reassignment and the phone call heard through an ill-fitting door and the name spoken across a thinning room. She was 34 years old, and she was good at her job, and she was still, even now, doing it. The cloth went down flat. She smoothed it once with her palm, corner to corner, and the table was done.